Hi, I'm Thomas Armstrong. I'm 72 years old and I just published my first novel. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about my journey to publishing this novel. It was quite a long journey. If I go back far enough, I was 13 years old when I think I first formed this idea of writing a novel. I wrote 2 to 3 pages about a guy from Poland who had escaped the Iron Curtain and was sitting on a hill facing the west, reflecting on his newfound freedom. So 2 to 3 pages, that was it. Then when I was 19 and I was on an island in the Aegean Sea, I wrote another 2 to 3 pages of a novel, which never got completed. So these were events that just came and went, and the desire to write a novel was sort of latent in me. Actually, then in the 1990s, I began to get the first inklings of the novel that I did write. I remember being in a bathtub and taking a bath, and I suddenly got this feeling in my stomach that said, hey, I really could write a novel. It was a feeling of certainty that I had. And so I began actually making notes. That's how I started. Um, the first notes that I made were from 1990, and when I was 39 years old. And some of those notes actually found their way into the final novel that I finished in 2015. The 1990s I was also a foundation setting, laying for me of the novel. I did a number of things. I went to the Santa Barbara Writers Conference 3 years in a row with the hope of writing a novel. And I think I did start another 2 to 3 pages on a novel about children. It was going to be about someone stealing the children. And I remember writing a creative manifesto of how I would dedicate my life to creative writing. This was a very strong desire within me. And I should say that all along this trail, I had been a writer of nonfiction books. I've actually written 19 nonfiction books related to children's creativity and learning and human development and psychology, self-help, that kind of thing. And anyway, I had this longing, and I was keeping these notes in my journal. And finally, in the year 2000, I remember having a conversation with a girl who was my next door neighbor. We had a long conversation on the phone. And something about that conversation with the child clicked with me, and I set down the beginnings of the first chapter of what became the novel. And over the course of 15 years, it took me to write my novel. And it's called Childless. It's about a childless child psychologist who tries to foil a US government plot to remove childhood from the human genome. They want to label or diagnose childhood as a medical disorder and then eliminate it through genetic engineering from the human genome. That's what my novel became over time. And it was a long and winding road, to quote the Beatles. And I found myself doing it in fits and starts. I was having my regular career writing these nonfiction books. I was traveling a lot, doing workshops and keynotes on my nonfiction books. But all along, I was carrying this thread of wanting to write the novel and actually beginning to write the novel. And I started to write chapters. And as I wrote chapters, things came up. For me, the difficult thing about writing the novel was it was totally different from nonfiction books. When I write a nonfiction book, I have a whole idea that pops out right at the beginning of what this book is going to look like. And then most of the writing is just filling in the blanks to that whole concept. And I find it rather relatively easy to do. Whereas writing this novel was totally different. It required a totally different side of myself. It required me to dip into my unconscious, which was a kind of a scary thing to do because you never know what's going to come up. And remember the fear of staring at the blank a piece of paper, or in this case, the blank screen, and having to fill it with words. And what I found was that I would, feel this fear, and so I would avoid writing. I would find other things to do rather than write the novel, until finally some force inside me would be almost screaming at me. I actually had these dreams where there would be some situation where I'd be crying and I'd be screaming, "Oh, you've got to finish that novel." And those kind of dreams would spur me on, would get me back on track to maintain my progress on the novel. And so over a period of time, I added chapters, and as I added chapters, new thoughts would come in. That's the wonderful thing about this way of writing, um, coming in with no plans and then just seeing what emerges. That was one of the great beauties and joys of writing the novel. When I actually was able to get through that barrier that I felt, the actual act of writing the novel involved me in some of the most joyous experiences that I've ever had, um, especially, writing a book. And I entered, I guess, what psychologists call a period of flow, which is this almost meditative state in which one is engaged in something that is neither too easy nor too difficult. It's right in the zone, so to speak, the flow experience. And it was those experiences of flow, I think, that carried the writing of the book along. And eventually I got um, to, 30, 35, 36 chapters. I wrote the novel in various places, mostly in my office where you see me here. And but other times I would write on planes as I was traveling to workshop. And I remember I finished the novel when I was teaching in the Mid East. I was in Abu Dhabi, which is in the United Arab Emirates, and I was staying at a hotel for actually 5 weeks. And I was doing seminars on the weekends, but I had the weekdays free. So I had 5 days a week for 5 weeks to do nothing but write. And I was able to actually finish the novel in 2015 in Abu Dhabi. And it was kind of fun because I was staying at the Abu Dhabi Hilton. And after I finished, I was feeling great inside. And I found out that there was a restaurant in the hotel called Hemingway's. And I was able to celebrate the finishing of the novel by going down to the Hemingway's restaurant. It wasn't a great meal, by the way, but it was fun celebrating the finishing of the novel by being in this restaurant that had pictures of Hemingway all on the walls. And so that finishing the novel obviously was one big part of the probably the biggest part of publishing the novel, obviously. But then came the issue of publishing it. And I had a literary agent, and she was a wonderful agent, still is, and she helped me publish a number of successful and moderately successful books, my nonfiction books. But when I gave her the novel, she didn't want to represent it. And I don't want to really get into the whole thing about that, but I did cut my ties to the agent so that I could look for another agent who would be willing to represent it. And so I started that part of the journey, and I wrote query letters to many, many different agents. I actually found this platform on the internet called Query Tracker, which I would recommend for people who are looking for an agent. And it had a list of 1,700 agents. And I went through the whole list looking for agents who represented the kind of book that I was writing. My book is kind of like a dark comedy, a satire, sort of like a science fiction with a genetic engineering, kind of literary fiction and kind of psychological fiction. It was, what they call a genre busting book. And so I found agents who represented any of those genres and had a list of about 60 agents. And I learned about how to write a great query letter because that's what you do when you look for an agent. You have to write a very short, punchy query letter. And then usually you have to include some sample material. Often it's the first 5 pages, or the first 10 pages, or the first chapter, the first 3 chapters, whatever. Each agent was different. Each agent had a different way of submitting work. And so I learned a lot about that process as I was engaged in trying to find an agent. Well, the upshot of it was that I heard back from 57 agents. They all rejected my query. They all passed on it, as they say. And none of them, this was what was even more disturbing to me, none of them even requested to see the complete manuscript. And I was, really kind of stunned by that. But I saw the writing on the wall, and saying that the universe obviously didn't want me to go that route. And while I'm talking about the universe, I should say that um, I threw the I Ching. Initially, I wasn't even going to get the novel published, but I thought, well, let me ask the I Ching. The I Ching, for those of you that don't know, is a Chinese text, an ancient Chinese text consisting of these hexagrams, which are 6 lines, either broken or continuous, 6 lines. And there are 64 of these hexagrams. And what you do is you throw some coins, 3 coins, and look at the heads or tails. And the heads or tails tell you whether or not it's a broken or a continuous line. So you come up with one or two of these hexagrams. And I threw the hexagram for the question, should I publish my novel? And how should I do that? Should I self-publish? Should I find an agent? Should I just forget the whole thing? I was open to that. Just, well, I wrote it, and that was a reward in and of itself. So anyway, I threw the I Ching to that question, and I got an incredible answer. It was like, um, you know, yeah, do it, publish it. It's gonna be great. It was like heaven coming down to the creative, and there were all these words saying, the people at high places look favorably upon people in low places. Well, after my experience with the 57 agents rejecting the novel, I began to question my faith in the I Ching. It's worked for me in the past, but I wondered about it. At any rate, the I Ching got me willing to look for a publisher. And once I saw that, somehow agents weren't going to accept it, I think the issue with agents is they're looking for something really quick to grab them. If you haven't grabbed them in the first paragraph of your query letter or your sample material, they're really not interested, and they get thousands of these requests, um, every year from writers and lots of emails. And actually, about half of the agents didn't even respond. And, I could have felt bitter about this, but, I had this understanding that they're really busy, and they've got to make a living, and they've got to find manuscripts they're going to sell so that they, can make a living. So I understand that the novel I was writing probably it doesn't start out really fast, with a punch like a James Patterson novel does. It takes this time to build up. And so I think that also was a reason why they didn't pick it up. Well, finally, I was walking along my street And I was thinking, well, maybe you should try Amazon. They have a platform for publishing. And as I had that thought, I looked up in the sky and I saw a shooting star. And I thought, the universe speaks again. And so I decided to self publish on Amazon. They have a nice platform called Kindle Direct Publishing. And on this platform, you can design your cover. They have a mini platform called Cover Creator, and then another uh, platform called Kindle Create, where you can actually create the Kindle text for your novel and or your book, any kind of book that you want to write. And so I did that. I did the work of inputting my manuscript onto Kindle Create, and so I created the Kindle, and then also they had a process for downloading a PDF document for the paperback version. And this took a lot of time. There was a learning curve involved and formatting the manuscript, changing it from my Word document into a PDF document and making everything fit and look like it's supposed to look in a book form. It was a whole different um, uh, kettle of fish from a simple Word document, as if you were writing a letter to somebody. And I had to put in, headers and footers and page numbers. And I also had a dedication page and a epigraph and, all kinds of things that needed to be on this side of the book page rather than the left side, or had to be on the left side rather than the right side. That took a long time, actually. It took several months for me to figure that out. At any rate, I finally did that and I published it in September, September of 2022, for those of you that are watching in future years. And so that was an exciting experience to see the published book up on Amazon, to see the cover. I really liked the cover. I found an image on iStock, which is owned by the Getty Foundation, and it was an empty baby carriage in a kind of a dark, moody atmosphere. And I thought that's a really good image for Childless. The idea of childless disappearing in our time. And so I liked seeing that cover up there. And it's only been 2 months or so since I have been thinking about the next stage of the publishing process, which is the marketing process. And what I've been doing for that is I've got a mailing list of 1,000 people, and I've sent a couple of mailings on that. I've been making videos like this one. There's several other videos where I talk about different aspects of the novel, the genetic engineering part, the part that involves there are neurodiverse characters in this novel. I've written a couple of books on neurodiversity, and so in my novel I've got characters with Williams syndrome, autism, progeria, dwarfism, and schizophrenia. And they all use their gifts to move the plot along. So I've made several of these. You can look at my playlist on YouTube to find the other videos in this series. And I've been sending books off to everybody I can think of, to famous writers, to the New York Times, although that probably isn't going to work because usually you have to submit your book uh, months in advance of the pub date. And but I've been sending it to friends. I've been encouraging friends to write reviews, um, and other people who've been showing an interest in the novel. And so far, I've gotten about 7 or 8 reviews, and I've set up my website to especially include a lot of good information about the novel. And so I see it as an ongoing process that will extend into next year. that I will need to persevere and work hard and finish. Oh, I'm having trouble with this. There we go. Um, Persevere and finish promoting the novel to the extent that eventually, God willing, it will take on a life of its own through that most wonderful of all marketing tools, and that is word of mouth. So that's a little bit about my journey, how it started long ago as an inkling, as a feeling in my belly, really, that I followed. And I think a key for me here in finishing the novel was the sense I had of obsession. I'm a little bit obsessive about things, and it can be a negative and it can also be a positive. And the obsession meant this idea of writing the novel simply wouldn't go away. It kept coming back. Sometimes it would go away for a few months, even as long as a year or so. But I would always remember to keep my eyes on the prize and go for the goal, so to speak, go for the gold, um, and see where that takes me. And ultimately, it's taken me to, yes, that's something you should include, Thomas, in your video. Actually, show the book. I learned that from Jack Canfield, the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul, co author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. He said, when you're giving a speech, always hold the book up and show people. They'll be more likely to buy a copy. At any rate, it is on Amazon, and it's in these two forms as an ebook, so you can read it on your Kindle, on your tablet, on your iPhone, and it's also available in this paperback form. So I hope this has been helpful to you, especially for those of you who are, maybe over 50 years old and you're wondering, well, is it too late for me to write a novel? Well, like I said, I'm 72 years old and I just wrote this novel. So let's hear it for the late bloomers. Bye bye.